Hey everybody, and welcome back to Bulletproof Selling. My name is Sean Rhodes. I'm the Chief Sales Architect and author of Bulletproof Selling, a guide for systemizing sales on the battlefield of business. Now, here at Bulletproof Selling, we believe that hope is not a sales strategy, and so we are here each and every week to help increase the performance of salespeople, the results of their pipelines, and the results of their teams. Now, on this Bulletproof Selling series, we get to share insights from the top minds in sales, authors, speakers, consultants, those that are actually out there managing sales teams. And my commitment is that out of every single episode we do, we get to build a sales team with our guests. Excuse me, that sales team. I wish we could do that. We get to build a sales system with our guests. No matter the size of your team or the size of your goals, that system will be able to apply to you. Now, it's on the rare occasion I get to meet someone that is a nerd about systems as much as I am. And our guest today, Josh Fonger, is definitely that type of nerd. And I say this in the best of terms because I know we're going to have a lot of fun talking about systems today. Josh is actually the systems guy for business. So whereas I really focus specifically on sales, he's the guy for business in general. So I know we're going to learn a lot from each other and get to build a very cool system. So I welcome Josh onto the show. Sir, it is a pleasure having you on Bulletproof Selling. Welcome. And tell us about Work the System, because your company is literally got system in the title, man. I'm so excited to have you here. So please introduce yourself.
Yes, great to be here. Thanks, Sean. I get to work with the godfather of systems, I guess, at least in my mind, Sam Carpenter, author of Work the System.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have heard of that book, and now in its fourth edition. And so basically, what we do together is we help companies with their systems, and that starts with their mindset, their strategy, their principles, their procedures, kind of taking that whole thread the whole way through the business. And of course, sales is a key part of that.
Absolutely. So I know that when the book that I've read, as far as the part I've gotten through and Work the System, and I definitely recommend it for all of the listeners of Bulletproof Selling. Like, if you enjoy sales systems, you're going to get a lot out of Work the System, because not only does it delve into how to build systems for a business, or whether you're working for somebody else, kind of how to own the systems that you control, but also the mindset of it. And so something that I've really been able to draw out of it so far is that systems do probably just as much, if not for our mindset, as they do for the actual tactics of what we do in our business. And I definitely find this to be the case because I run my business through systems. Of course, I run all of my sales through systems that we get to talk about here at Bulletproof Selling. But I'd love for you to share a little bit about what you've discovered over the years as far as the impact that systems have on the mindset of the people that begin to apply them in their businesses.
Yeah, well, the key thing that I notice whenever I'm walking into a new client, whether it's a coaching client, a consulting client, is that they're so stuck in the day-to-day of what they do, the habits, the traditions of what they do, and they don't actually see that their life and their business is composed of these separate pieces that happen linearly over the lifetime of the business, again and again and again. They don't see the separate systems, and therefore they're always reacting to the stimulus that's coming towards them instead of architecting a solution onto their business problems. And so therefore it's always, well, this is happening, so I should do this, or this client's coming to me with this problem, so I should do that. And as opposed to getting above their business and looking down and understanding, okay, these pieces I have control over, and what can I actually do to get a result? Let's just say it's Z, and I'm starting at A. How do I get from A to Z? And what are the steps I can actually choreograph to make that consistently happen, as opposed to just, I need more sales, let's just work harder. And so generally I work with people once they've maxed out on their energy, like they can't work any harder, they don't have any extra capital, they don't have any extra time, they don't have any extra talent, they've maxed those out, and they realize, actually what I need now is to build in a system where that we can actually scale. We can go from 5 employees to 500 employees, and they realize that what they're doing now, it kind of has to be broken in order for them to get to that next level.
And I love the way that the CEO of systems in general, right, Sam, he'd mentioned in his book, the things that he sees a lot of business people and managers drop into is the role of fire killer. And I thought that was a really interesting term, and it rang a lot of bells in my head because I was on stage in Las Vegas just last week. Live events are beginning to come back, as I'm sure you've seen. I was speaking to a couple hundred business leaders, and one of the key elements of the keynote that I give is that we spend so much of our time dealing with the exact same fire. almost in the same spot, right? Often it's out of the same person because we don't have a system in place. So rather the systems are there, as Sam would say, we're just not monitoring them, right? We're not measuring them. We're not making sure we improve them. So as a problem happens, our role then is to go rush over to that fire and put it out, and then go to the next fire and put it out. And sometimes we can spend decades or an entire career doing that. So I love the fact that you mentioned that, hey, systems are a way to really begin putting out the fires, monitoring what's going on in our companies, and taking a more conscious role in the creation of the future that we're building. So we're going to dive into that in a minute, but I know folks are really interested to know your story, sir. So how did you become the consigliere, so to speak, of the godfather of systems? How did you end up in this role? Because obviously, you and I might be about the same age or close to it. We don't have 40 years behind us in business. How'd you end up as the systems guy?
Yeah, well, I'm sure everyone says it's not by choice where they ended up. My undergraduate's in architecture, thought I was going to be an architect, and then I got into real estate development. Okay. And then as me and everyone else I knew was getting laid off, I had to figure out something else to do with my life in the 2008-ish time period. And I got my master's in business. I always liked business. And I wrote my thesis about why you should never hire a business consultant.
Ooh, nice.
Got to a point in my life where that was the only job I could actually do, was to be an independent business consultant. So I started off that when I was 26, and got connected with a group where I was the guy, and I would just fly from company to company to company and help them with anything. Outside sales, inside sales, cultural redesign, strategy, help them through bankruptcy, financial forecasts, you name it. I would, inventory management. I would just kind of fly out there and try to figure it out. And that gets very exhausting, very exhausting. And what I was realizing is that while I was working with a client, they would get good results working with me, but then, I would leave, and then things would start to go down, and then I'd fly back and work with them for a few months. Then I would leave, and then things would start to go down. And I also realized that I was just burning myself out. I didn't have a clear way of doing what I did. It was just, let me react to what they need, and I'll just figure it out when I get there. And I met Sam Carpenter, and he wanted to start a consulting business associated with his book. He didn't write the book to work more hours, but he saw a need in people who actually want to fix their businesses. And so I said, yeah, sure, I'll take this gig on. Started working with them as a contractor, employee, partner, and that now I own the business. But during that trajectory, I've had a chance to see that actually, if instead of just reacting to the problems, they might have a sales problem or employee problem, it's better, it's wiser, it's a smarter investment to actually build the infrastructure, which is this mindset, strategy, principles, procedures, so that what you do sticks. And it really hit home for me when one of my early clients, and we did this is before I met Sam, fixed their company inside out. It was a flooring store, probably doing $5 million in sales, a couple locations, and they were about to go bankrupt. And then we helped them reorganize, and then really they shot back. A great success story. And I see on LinkedIn, and this guy's in his late 50s. Now that company's gone, and he's just a salesperson. He used to run a company of over 100 employees. Now he's just a sales guy. Like, he lost everything. So even though I thought, wow, that was going great, years later, it didn't last, right? It fell apart. It crumbled again. It was because I never actually documented the systems of how to run the business. It was just, let's react and let's just make it happen. And then it fell apart again. And that's what I call a yo-yo business, where it's just up and down, up and down, up and down. It never really goes anywhere. It kind of stays in the same place, feast or famine, and then eventually there's a series of bad luck that happens. Key salesperson leaves, a spouse gets sick, one of the big suppliers raises their prices, a vendor quits, and then whatever happens, and then those things all combine, and then the company's gone, just like that. And they never actually built anything, any scaffolding to finally get them from level to level. They just survived. And that's most companies, that's most businesses. That's what we do, is we're on a mission to make sure that doesn't happen. Actually, you can actually take this company somewhere, serve more people, and provide more value.
And I love the way that people often phrase it, like feast or famine. Okay, so that's a great term. Most salespeople are very familiar with that term because sales is often cyclical. So the idea behind any type of sales system is to try to build a little bit more predictability into all aspects of what you do, from entering new leads into the pipeline, to managing those leads through a sales process, to getting them into conversations, to converting them, to generating referrals. Like the entire sales cycle. although it's going to be chaotic because we are dealing with humans that often aren't on the same plan we are, how do we develop a little bit more predictability in this? So I often, look at entrepreneurs, like business people, salespeople, and I see that they're playing jazz with all of their processes and their systems, and that aren't running systems at all. Now, you and Sam would be the first people to tell me, well, Sean, there are systems in play. They're just not being managed at all whatsoever, right? The systems are running, but you remove one element, and suddenly this house of cards really begins to crumble fast. And it was just these thin little cards that were holding it up. And so in my business and in the businesses of the clients that I get to coach, the number one thing I'll tell them is that, hey, if we can prevent having to recreate the wheel ever again, that's where we really need to start right there. And that's a personal kind of a thing of mine, that if I'm doing something and I notice, wow, this might come into play at some point in the future, I need to document it. I need to get a system in place so that I don't have to try to build this thing from scratch ever again. And so before we dive into sales, I'd love to get your insight into the operational aspect of a business and where you see people kind of winging it, not building a system, which means when this thing happens again, whether it's an employee leaving or a customer leaving, or we need to onboard a new client because this is the biggest deal we're ever going to have in our lives and it could yield to a lot more, we're just trying to build it as we go and we never document it. So how can a business person, which all salespeople are, really start to think about not playing jazz with their company, trying to get good established procedures in place so that although it is going to change in the future and we do have to update our systems, we can at least begin today by building something basic? How should someone start in that realm?
First off, I want to say I like that idea of jazz. Jazz bands are really small and it's a couple experts.
Yeah.
And it's very fluid and there's mistakes and they cover over it, but you don't see gigantic symphonies doing jazz. It's very organized, right. And there's very set things to do. And it's a great way to put it. So if you want to have a 500-person symphony, you can't do it like jazz. That's a great
right.
thing about it. But in terms of actually identifying where to start or what systems you're neglecting, it's probably everything. It's probably everything in your business. And I like to start with the place where you're doing something the most often. So if it's sales calls and you say, well, I've been doing sales calls all my life. We do 50 a day or 100 a day, whatever it is. Well, if it's that important, maybe you should actually look at it and see if you can identify the separate pieces of that sales call to figure out how to make it not, close, let's just say 10%. How about 15%? If you're going to do it that often, why not focus on that? And so oftentimes when I work with companies, they'll say, well, we already know the best way to do it, and it's in each person's head. But once we get
that's dangerous.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And I'm sure everyone understands that. But once we take the collective brain power of everybody and put it down on paper or some other medium, what it does is it gives people an ability to analyze what they've been doing. And it gives them an ability to say, is there a way to improve this? Is there a way to make it better, faster, higher quality, use technology, reduce errors, whatever that might be? There's always ways to improve it, tweak it. Sometimes it's 5% improvement. Sometimes it's 100% improvement, but you don't know until you get it down on paper. And the reason most people don't do this is because it requires slowing down, and that's a skill set that entrepreneurs and a lot of salespeople, let's watch this, don't have that personality trait. Right? They have the personality trait of kind of being good performers, like being good firefighters. Like they are good at it because they practice it and they enjoy it and it makes them feel good. And to go slow and to analyze and to separate sounds very tedious. It does not sound fun.
Yeah.
So even though it's going to make them more money, it's going to allow them to do that leap they haven't been able to do. I think it's more of a I'm not good at this. I don't like this. I don't want to do this. This is not fun. So they will avoid it. And so that's kind of that's part of our mantra, is that we only work with mature business owners, people who are mature enough to know, hey, you know what? It's time to grow up. It's time to actually build the infrastructure, do that thing I've been avoiding for so long. And beyond that, it's a perspective issue, which is a sales system is not going to help me very much today. Document it. It's not going to help me very much tomorrow, but over the next year, it could 5x my business. Whereas working really hard today, I can see that today.
Yeah.
And so if you go from a short-term mindset to a long-term mindset, systems are very obvious. But if you stay in the short-term mindset and short-term satisfaction, you'll never invest the time, energy, and money to do it right. And so we really have to focus on the leaders, the managers, the employees' mindsets, because they all say, hey, I could just do it faster if I just clicked here and did this. And you could do it faster today, but that's not
Yeah.
a scalable approach. And so we really have to kind of get their minds around it first before anything we
Mhm.
do is going to stick in the infrastructure.
And I totally agree with you. The teams that I was able to study around the world, inside and outside of the military, especially the ones that were involved in any type of prep for combat, we had a saying that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And I remember training with even just a basic weapon. So, coming up with a rifle or a pistol just to get it on target, we would not start off by trying to figure out how fast could we do this, even though in combat you need to be able to do it fast. We would go through thousands of repetitions almost at like slow-mo speed. I remember with old like VCRs, you used to be able to put it on slow mo, right? Where you would go like in the martial arts when I'm instructing anyone that's a beginner in how to do any type of technique. If they know anything about Tai Chi, I say, I want you to pretend you're doing Tai Chi. Like, make it that slow. Like, it should take you a half hour to execute this whole technique. Because everybody, like you said, even in business, is in such a hurry to get it done fast. Because I want to see the results. I want to put rounds on target. I want to throw somebody to the mat. I want to see an increase in sales today. But yet, the problem with that is it's not replicable. We'll never be able to break it down to its subcomponents and figure out maybe this entire, like a quarter of what we're doing is inefficient. And we could pull it out and just not do it anymore because it's not yielding any benefit. But we'll never figure that out if we're just trying to bang through it as fast as we can. So I'm 100% aligned with you there. We have to really slow it down and figure out, all right, what is the thing that's going to give us the biggest impact today? So moving into sales now, and you and I could talk operations for a long time, but I really want to make it specific to sales. Where do you see salespeople relying on hope a little more than they should in all of the businesses that you consult? And I know hope is endemic, it's systemic in probably a negative way, but where are salespeople, the ones that you've been able to coach, really, putting their eggs in the basket of hope more than they should?
Well, that's always the end of the month where they think, "Oh, I'm going to hit my numbers," and then they just never get
Yeah,
close to the
okay.
numbers. And when I'm working with a sales team, it's typically with the manager. And
Hmm.
the thing that, at least what I notice with managers that I work with, is that they they base their success on how much time they're going to spend swooping in. So they make it happen by swooping in, by actually
Mm,
um, uh, being on the calls with their sales teams, taking the sales calls, closing the big sales. And so instead of actually building a system to nurture and grow their sales teams, they actually just get sucked into the sales cycle as much as possible, and owners as well.
yeah,
And that's the hardest thing I have to break, is that I know the owner can sell better. That's obvious. I know that the sales manager can sell better, but that's not what we're trying to build here, right? And that's not
right,
actually scalable. And so it's worth it to build a sales system. I tell this to my own sales team, is that if it can't work with an average person, then the system can't is not scalable. Like, this business is not sustainable. If our business only operates with amazing super rock star salesperson who's willing to work
right.
nights, weekends, and do, well, then it's not a good system. It's not sustainable. As soon as that person leaves, the company's gone. And I've seen
Oh,
that.
and
And
it
so,
even gets worse, Josh, if the person decides not to leave, they hamstring the company. I've seen that in clients that I've consulted with as well, right? Where that
yep.
salesperson knows it's all in their head. If they leave, revenue's gone. So they basically own the company. They're the
I,
chief executive officer in reality, if not in title.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, and so with owners who are in that situation, which is happens all the time, is I try to say, well, this person no longer needs to be, integral to the business, because systems won't leave you. People come and go, but systems won't. And so let's
Right.
take obviously the skill sets from the sales manager, who might know a lot of things, nuanced things, and then everyone in the sales team, because everyone has something to offer, and then we get it down on paper. And I guess the key thing that we try to focus in on is every single element of the sales cycle. So it's not just sales, it's, okay, how did we actually get the lead? How are we managing the lead? How are we categorizing the lead? How are we warming the lead? How are we qualifying the lead? How are we presenting? How are we closing? How are we following up? And each one
Mm-hmm.
of these pieces is a separate component of good sales. It's not just, wow, that guy's a good salesperson. We need to find more of those people. And it is good to have a good recruiting system, of course, right? But each one of those pieces will make a better salesperson. And years ago, I was working with was a retail location, and we had this top salesperson. And then we had 3 people who were new in sales, and they weren't as good as the top salesperson. The top salesperson didn't want to do this whole systems thing. And we said, okay. And he was too important to fire. So fine, you just do your own thing. You're on your own island. You're separate. The rest of us are going to do this new way. And we documented, how do you, what do you wear? How do you greet someone at the front door? What do you say? How do you identify their personality type? And then how do you walk them through the showroom to the right products? How do you do the right pricing with this particular person? How do you do the right intake forms? Every single piece. Let's actually just document. And it took a few months. And then we trained these new salespeople. And then a few months later, what do you know? And the new salespeople are closing higher tickets. They're closing the higher average transaction, and they're getting more referrals. And the other guy's like, well, what are you guys doing? And then eventually he's attracted to the system. But it took a while, right? It took a few months. But again, this is the mindset of the leader that has to say, you know what, I want to build a system where average new salespeople can operate just as good as my top performers. And that's really the approach we take. And I think that the thing that most people miss is they might diagram this out and they might even discuss it, but they'll never actually write it down. They'll never actually go through the steps of writing it down. That's where the real magic happens. And it's the hard part. It's the dirty work. It's the work no one wants to do, really. But that's really where the magic happens.
Yeah, and the someone that I think has a lot in common with Sam Carpenter is the fellow who wrote the E-Myth, Mr. Gerber, I believe his name is.
Yep.
And he has a line that I love using in there. He says, if you really want to start to systemize what you do, either as a salesperson or a business person, imagine that tomorrow they're going to franchise 5,000 of your team or your business or your location. All right, so what do you have to begin doing today to get those 5,000 other franchisees ready to stand up? And you think like McDonald's and all the fast food chains and Starbucks and everything, they can take someone with no experience and have them performing at, at least a viable level very, very quickly. And it's not because they hire the most brilliant folks on the planet, it's because of their systems. So something that I would love to dive into, this is going to be a sales system that's going to help just about every sales leader on the planet, is how do I begin to extricate myself from having to, kind of parachute in, if you will, and save my salespeople. Because I've seen it happen. You were mentioning, I'm like, I end up doing that a lot on my sales team. So I could use this system as well. And so when we talk about trimming hope away from sales strategies, we talk about creating systems to do it here at Bulletproof Selling. And that starts with this acronym TRIM, T-R-I-M. So the first part of this, and this is something that I would really love to get your perspective on how a sales leader can begin to use it. What is the trigger that a sales leader needs to begin using to understand, hey, this is an optimal opportunity for a system to be built? Because yes, I can parachute in, but as my team grows, as they get more leads in the pipeline, I need to start building something that doesn't require me to have to, put on a pack and get into the field every single time something is potentially going to go off the tracks. So the T in TRIM is trigger. What's the trigger element in your mind that a sales leader can begin doing no matter what situation comes up on their sales team? And there's probably going to happen in the next probably hour and a half. I'd take a guess. For any sales leader listening to this, it's going to happen quickly. So what is the trigger? Is it when I hear something and I immediately want to dive in? I get an email that, this thing could be, 50-50 chance, and I really want to start to push that sale to the right side. As a sales leader, where do I need to start paying attention for my inclination, if you will, to dive in?
Yeah, well, I would make a list. I'd make a list of triggers. So I guess it's going to really depend, because I've worked with, used car dealerships and solar panel salespeople. It really
Right.
depends. But you have your list of triggers where hey, this is going sideways, or this person is going to push you off, or this person, it could be, hey, they didn't have the actual buyers at the table. They're missing one of the key buyers, stakeholders. There could be a whole list. And I think with the triggering events, some of those triggering events could be prevented, right? Hey, if we had done this before the sales call, it would have never happened. And I think that's the first trigger that a lot of people miss, is they have either unqualified or not pre-qualified or not pre-educated leads at the sales table where they shouldn't actually be there yet. And each one of those triggers are where a manager could say, you know what, hey, I could swoop in and solve this problem, but if I was smarter, I just would have, had my sales team send this email ahead of time, or had them fill out this questionnaire. Like with our sales team, we don't take sales calls on the phone unless someone either fills out an assessment or they fill out I'm forgetting the word for it. It's application, right? So they have an assessment
Yeah,
or an
yeah, yeah.
application, depending on what, and we won't take a sales call. Now, a salesperson who's really good could probably wield the conversation to close the sale, but this just warms them up. It pre-qualifies them, and of course, this is basics 101. But I would say make
Hmm.
sure that you first understand, hey, this trigger keeps happening. I could prevent it. And then in terms of the triggers that happen during the conversations, I think it's about identifying, well, this again could be overcome by this question, and a lot of that's going to have to happen during your training time. And I think that, at least with the sales teams I've seen, the sales manager will jump in on the one-to-one sales call to solve the problem. And I say,
Yeah.
hey, just take note of that. And that's part of your ongoing training. That's part of your onboarding with your training with your new sales team. So instead of training one-to-one, you should be training one-to-many, and you should be
Right.
recording it at a minimum. Like our sales guy, our sales manager, whenever he works with our sales team, we say, okay, break apart the call into two elements, kind of the coaching element where you're doing really intimate stuff, and then trained him on the problem he had a problem with and categorize that. And then we're going to save that in our archives so that every new salesperson can see that training module because
Hmm.
I don't want you to train one person. That's a waste of my money. I want you to train
Right.
everybody the next 10 years. So don't
Yes.
waste that effort.
Yeah.
And that's the other big thing that I think most people understand that, but it's 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 getting disciplined enough to work in that way, to have that broader vision. That's why every employee needs to have the vision. I'm not just working today, I'm working for the future. And I'm building something great that I want to be a part of. And I mean, it's kind of a long answer to a short question, but I think that if they
No,
have the
no,
right
I love
mindset,
it.
they'll understand that they're not, it's not a waste of time. Do you want to give
Hmm.
the same advice to 100 more salespeople in the next 5 years? Or do you want to give this
Because you
advice
will if
once?
you don't begin capturing it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, you absolutely
And we,
will. So I've got the trigger lined up. I absolutely love that, and it's
Mhm.
something that could begin even last week, right? Even if you think retroactively, the last 5 calls I had to jump into, or the last 5 sales I had to salvage. Why did I have to salvage them? And just
Mhm.
begin to make a list. That could be a brilliant trigger. And so the next
Yep.
piece of this is to make this process repeatable. That's the R in trim, because I want to take this system and I want to be able to replicate it for the next 5 problems that I have across potentially 5 different salespeople, so that I can begin building systems I'd never have to step in for that reason again. Because the salesperson solves it earlier in the sales process. They go to the archives and look at the training video, whatever that looks like, right? So, where do you recommend a repeatable process lives for how a sales leader should start extricating themselves from having to jump in and parachute into these sales calls or
Mhm.
these sales cycles, if you will? Is that written down in a spreadsheet? Is it a checklist we keep on a whiteboard? How do I make sure I'm following the same process once I get that trigger in place to begin solving these things ahead of time?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to always say it depends, but I think most people can read between the lines. It needs to be accessible. It needs to be easy to find. There's no point in gathering up ways to solve these triggering events somewhere in a black book that's hidden in your file drawer, right? So it needs to be where the sales
Right.
team can access it. So a lot of times my initial starting place when I work with companies is I say, hey, they only have one screen. Let's get them a second screen so they can have the script, so they
Mhm.
can have their objections, so they can at least be more efficient when they're on the phone, when they're working, when they have the cues. So I like whiteboards for brainstorming and diagramming, but they get erased, they get they get lost, they're too
Yeah.
far away. And so I really like to have those cues, those scripts, those handling objections, those things very accessible. And so we build those things into some kind of knowledge database. There's a lot of them out there, and some of them are specific
Hmm.
for sales teams. And so I just make sure that whatever you're capturing is accessible to all the sales team. It's easy to find, and you have to make sure you force it on your sales team because everyone, maybe this is the rest of your trim, I don't know the acronym, but the key thing with anything that you create like this is that you have to force your people to actually use it until they want to use it. um,
Hmm.
because the natural inclination is, oh, I got this, I don't need to look at that, I know it'll be fine, I could tell based on instincts. And you want your company to be run based on systems, not based on instincts. Now, the instincts might inform the systems, and there might be, on a 12-step process, step number 11 might say, hey, based on your gut, go here or go there. So you can build
Right.
instincts within your systems. But as a leader, as a manager, as an owner, you can't tell what's working or not working unless you know everyone's following it so you can measure it. Otherwise, you say,
Right.
hey, sales have not been working last month. And then you could say, hey, team, are you following that system? They're like, no, we're kind of just doing it however we want to. Well, then you have no idea
Well,
what's
that's
working and
not
not
following a
working.
system, right? Yeah, and you can't go back and actually do the next part of the acronym, which is improve the system. And so we've got
Yeah.
the trigger, we've got making it repeatable. If we move into the I, which is improvable, let's say that as a sales leader, I've tried the first couple of steps. So I've figured out, all right, this is the one reason I have to dive in and save my team and save the sale, either to save them time or to hopefully close the business where it wouldn't have closed otherwise. I've got that documented. I've got this thing repeatable in that it is outside of my head. It's in an accessible database in my company. Google Sheets work really well for this for everybody listening, and they're free.
Mhm.
Brilliant solution. That's what I use. So I've got that mapped out. Now I want to improve this thing because I want to make sure that not only am I measuring it, which is actually the M. We'll get there in a minute. But I want to make sure that my salespeople are improving in the way that they sell, and at least I'm improving and save time for myself as a sales leader because I no longer have to dive in and save their sales, at least for the reasons that we've built systems for. So, how do I begin to track whether this thing is actually improving the way that my salespeople sell? Now that I'm hopefully removing myself a little bit at a time from having to parachute in.
Mhm. Yeah, and this might be counterintuitive, but based on a lot of client work, I don't start measuring. And I like how you do the TRIM acronym this way. I don't start measuring first. I don't even start with measurements. I don't even start with
Mm-hmm.
baseline numbers. I just say let's start by writing down the way we're doing it, and then let's get everyone together and say, is there a better way? And the better way is there
Right.
a faster way? Is there an easier way? Is there a way that we believe instinctually in our gut? Or hey, Jim's really good at closing. What do you think? And Sally's really good at warming them up. What do you think? And so
Mm-hmm.
we kind of bring the best ideas, and instinct written down is a great way to start with improvements. And so if you got 10 salespeople, the way to improve it is to write it down and then have all 10 poke holes in it. You're going to improve
Yeah.
it just by doing that alone. And you don't have to take a lot of time with analysis and tracking for 6 months first and trying
Mm-hmm.
to run a whole bunch of effort. It's just the instincts alone. And you'd be amazed the obvious errors that other people can see that you're doing that you just don't even know you're doing. And so I think that would be the key thing is let everyone see it, give it the light of day, and improvements are just naturally going to happen.
I love that. All that. So we've got the trigger, we've got making it repeatable, making it improvable. Now the M, which I do leave to last for a reason, is the piece about measuring this thing. So not only is it working, which we hopefully can get through the improvable bit, but are my people actually using the systems that I'm putting into place to save myself time as a sales leader? Because if I come up, through your process, I get my people together, I say, we're having trouble with this part of the sales cycle. Everybody gives their ideas, their input. We build a best practice, we build a system, we implement it, hopefully. How do I begin to track, one, are my people using this thing? And am I really freeing up that much more of my time? How do I begin to
Mhm.
measure whether this system is actually working or not?
Yeah, well, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to tell by your gut. That's the first thing because you're just going to feel, hey, I'm not getting called as often, and that's usually our first
Yeah.
measurement. It's subjective, of course, right? But then I think you're going to be measuring the numbers. If you're already measuring, average transaction, close rate, number of leads coming in, all those different things, you're going to see a noticeable improvement in the numbers. And I think that I would hope most sales managers are already doing that. But you could add a few new numbers, like number of times I need to go in there and save a job. Okay, it used to be 10
Hmm.
times a day. Now it's once a day. Right? I think just some of those
Right.
those numbers. What I like to do is I call them spot checks because measuring
Hmm.
is difficult and expensive. And so, we'll do spot checks as in not measuring everything 24/7, but spot checks. And then also we call it policing, where we will randomly pick a call and listen to the recording or randomly measure the quality of someone's interaction. So they won't know which call we're actually going to measure, but they know it is being
Hmm.
measured. And you could even add in bonuses and incentives and punishments if you want to specific to that, but just knowing that, hey, my calls are all being recorded, but I know they're not going to listen to them, and we just say, hey, we're just going to listen to 2 calls a week. Okay, I guess I probably should follow the system because I know they're going to be checking it and they're going to make a big deal if I
Hmm.
don't. And so we add in that extra level of policing as well, just to measure the I guess the measure them actually following the system. But I would say it virtually never happens where you go through all of this effort and the numbers go down. They essentially always go up
Right.
because you've
Oh
never
yeah.
actually taken the time to do this before. And so we can count on that. And then it's just tweaking, tweaking, tweaking. What can we do to raise it this percentage? What can we do to make it cost less? What can we do to, use technology more? But the measurements, once you have a nice baseline, I like to give it at least 3 months to see what the baseline
Mhm.
is. Then it's about, okay, well, how do we, pour gasoline on this, make it really scale?
I love it. Yeah. How do we make it even better? So that's an entire sales system that will hopefully save every sales leader that's listening to this a couple of hours a week at least. Because I know a lot of people are just used to putting on their packs and diving into save stuff. Obviously, if we're trying to run a business where we're directing strategy, we're solving big problems. We can't be on the ground with every one of our troops. So I love the system, sir. So for Work the System, which I advocate anybody go out, get the book, and it's actually being offered for free, I think, on your website. So you really have no excuse. I mean, if you can operate a computer, you can get your own copy of Work the System today. So how do we access that, Josh? How do we find out more about you? How do we find out more about the great work you're doing with companies?
Yeah, I would go to workthesystem.com. Like you said, we're giving away for free right now. We've got a ton of great resources. I have a podcast similar to yours, unlike just selling, but we're just focused on systemizing your whole business. And so that's going to be, sales, operations, HR, financial, admin, marketing, and really just seeing your whole life as a system and how can you improve it by this new perspective. And so I'd love to see folks there at workthesystem.com.
I love it, sir. Make sure you are checking that out. Well worth your time to examine all the resources they have posted there. And for us here at Bulletproof Selling, make sure you're following us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube for these live streams. And of course, check out the podcast that we produce out of these on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, everywhere podcasts can be found. And of course, for more sales systems to help you replace hope with certainty in your pipeline, check out all the free resources going up every single week over at www.bulletproof-selling.com. Well, Sean Rhodes here. It's been a pleasure serving the sales community alongside Josh. Josh, let's get out there and make selling bulletproof.
Sounds good. Thanks, Sean.